Imagine a warrior so fearless that his name echoed across the seas and lands of medieval Europe. A Viking who not only challenged empires but conquered one of the most powerful kingdoms of his time, France. This is Bjorn Ironside, the king who changed the course of history. But how did a Viking achieve such a feat? And why has his story almost been erased by time? During the Viking Age, between the 8th and 11th centuries, Nordic warriors left Scandinavia in search of riches, lands, and glory. Among them, Bjorn Ironside stood out not just as a ruthless leader, but as a brilliant strategist. The son of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, Bjorn inherited his father's ambition and the courage of a true conqueror. His journey led him to face armies, navigate treacherous seas, and ultimately challenge the very heart of medieval Europe. You know, it's fascinating to think that when Bjorn first set sail from the cold fjords of Scandinavia, many believed he was just another Viking raider, but he proved to be so much more. While other Vikings were content with raiding monasteries and small villages, Bjorn had his eyes set on a much greater prize: the wealthy kingdom of the Franks. The stories tell us that Bjorn was different from other Viking leaders. He wasn't just interested in gold and silver, though he certainly took his fair share. He was a man who understood the power of strategy and patience. He studied his enemies, learned their weaknesses, and struck when they least expected it. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of great empires, like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives and don't miss a single episode. Join us as we dive deep into the extraordinary life of the Viking who dared to challenge the might of an empire and succeeded. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next in this incredible story. Let me tell you about the rise of one of history's most fascinating figures. Bjorn Ironside wasn't born wearing a crown. He was born into legend as the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, one of the most feared Vikings to ever sail the northern seas. But being the son of a legend isn't always easy. From his earliest days, young Bjorn trained relentlessly to become a warrior, but deep inside, he harbored an ambition that went far beyond just following in his father's footsteps. He wanted to surpass his father's legacy. As a young man, Bjorn began making a name for himself by leading raids along the coasts of England and France. While other Vikings were content with simple plunder, Bjorn showed a remarkable talent for strategy and leadership. He wasn't just accumulating wealth and fame, he was learning, watching, and planning. You see, Bjorn had his sights set on something far greater than mere riches. He wanted a kingdom of his own. Here's something absolutely fascinating that many people don't know. According to the Norse sagas, Bjorn's ambitions took him far beyond the northern seas. He actually sailed all the way to the Mediterranean, a journey that would have seemed impossible to many of his contemporaries. He led raids on cities like Pisa and Luna in Italy. And speaking of Luna, let me tell you about one of the most brilliant military deceptions in medieval history. The story goes that when Bjorn reached Luna, he came up with an ingenious plan. Instead of launching a direct assault on the heavily fortified city, he sent word to the citizens that he had died, and his last wish was to receive a Christian burial within the city walls. The unsuspecting citizens, probably relieved that this fearsome Viking leader was dead, agreed to grant his final request. But here's the twist. When they carried Bjorn's supposedly dead body through the gates and into the cathedral, he suddenly sprang to life. He fought his way to the city gates, opened them for his waiting warriors, and captured the entire city in one brilliant stroke. This clever strategy shows us something crucial about Bjorn. He wasn't just another Viking raider. He was a master of warfare who understood that sometimes the best victories come not from brute force, but from cunning and intelligence. It's these kinds of tactics that would later help him achieve what many thought impossible, challenging the mighty Frankish Empire itself. Now let me tell you about one of the most daring military campaigns in medieval history. The year was 845 after Christ, and Paris was about to face a threat unlike anything it had seen before. Picture this: A fleet of Viking longships, their dragon-headed prows cutting through the morning mist, rowing up the Seine River. At their head was Bjorn Ironside, his reputation already growing, but about to become legendary. You see, Paris wasn't just any city. It was one of the crown jewels of the Carolingian Empire, a center of wealth, culture, and power. But here's the thing about Paris in those days. Despite its importance, the city's defenses had grown weak. The Franks had grown complacent, never expecting anyone would be bold enough to sail so far up the Seine. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Bjorn's fleet appeared like shadows out of the morning fog, catching the city completely off guard. The Vikings moved with terrifying efficiency, burning and looting everything in their path. But this wasn't mindless destruction. Bjorn was executing a carefully planned strategy. He knew exactly where to strike to bring the mighty Franks to their knees. King Charles the Bald, grandson of the famous Charlemagne himself, found himself in an impossible situation. Imagine being the ruler of one of the most powerful empires in Europe and suddenly having to negotiate with a Viking leader who had outsmarted all your defenses. Charles had no choice but to offer an enormous ransom in gold and silver to save his beloved Paris from complete destruction. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. Bjorn wasn't just after the gold. This victory sent a powerful message across Europe. The Vikings, under his leadership, could strike at the very heart of the mightiest empire of the time. The success of this raid changed everything. Suddenly, Bjorn wasn't just another Viking chieftain. He had proven himself as one of the greatest military commanders of the Viking Age. The most incredible part? This was just the beginning. The successful raid on Paris wasn't just about the enormous wealth Bjorn and his warriors took home. It was about showing the world that no city, no matter how powerful or well defended, was beyond his reach. This reputation would serve him well in his future conquests, as word spread that even the mighty Paris had fallen to Bjorn Ironside. Behind every great leader, there's often an equally remarkable ally, and in Bjorn's case, that ally was his brother, Ivar the Boneless. Now you might be wondering about that unusual nickname. While historical accounts differ, some say Ivar had a condition that made his bones brittle, but what he lacked in physical strength, he more than made up for with his razor-sharp mind. The partnership between these two brothers was something truly special. Think of it as the perfect storm. Bjorn, the towering warrior with unmatched combat skills and natural leadership, joining forces with Ivar, the brilliant tactician whose strategic mind could outmaneuver any opponent. Together, they were virtually unstoppable. What made their alliance so powerful was how perfectly their skills complemented each other. While Bjorn would lead from the front, inspiring his warriors with his courage and strength, Ivar would be planning 3 steps ahead, setting traps and orchestrating complex battle strategies. Their enemies never knew what hit them. They'd be preparing for Bjorn's direct assault only to find themselves caught in one of Ivar's clever tactical maneuvers. This brotherhood wasn't just about military campaigns. It was about trust, respect, and understanding. When they combined their forces for the Paris raid, it wasn't just another Viking attack. It was a masterclass in military strategy, with Bjorn's bold leadership style perfectly balanced by Ivar's cunning planning. Speaking of impressive feats, did you know that Bjorn's adventures took him as far as the Mediterranean Sea? That's right. This Norse warrior sailed further than most people of his time even dreamed possible. But we'd love to hear from you. What do you think was Bjorn's most impressive achievement? Was it the daring raid on Paris, his Mediterranean expeditions, or perhaps his alliance with Ivar? Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more incredible stories like this one. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to know which of Bjorn's conquests you find most impressive. Trust me, we've got plenty more fascinating medieval tales coming your way. After conquering vast territories and making a name that echoed throughout Europe, Bjorn Ironside established his kingdom in Sweden, where he ruled until his final days. But let me tell you something fascinating. His true legacy goes far beyond the battles he won or the lands he conquered. You see, Bjorn was a visionary in an age of raiders and warriors. While most Viking leaders were focused solely on raiding and plundering, Bjorn understood something that was centuries ahead of his time. True power and wealth didn't just come from the edge of a sword or the spoils of war. He realized that building alliances, establishing trade routes, and effectively governing territories were the keys to lasting success. Here's what makes Bjorn's story so remarkable. Imagine being a Viking leader in the 9th century after Christ, when your entire culture is built around raiding and warfare, and having the wisdom to see beyond that. Bjorn didn't just raid territories, he built relationships with them. He established diplomatic ties with regions he had once raided, transforming former enemies into trading partners. In his Swedish kingdom, Bjorn implemented systems of governance that were surprisingly sophisticated for his time. He maintained peace through a network of alliances, regulated trade, and even encouraged cultural exchange. This was absolutely revolutionary for a Viking leader of his era. You know what's particularly interesting? Archaeological evidence suggests that during Bjorn's reign, his territories experienced unprecedented prosperity. Excavations have revealed a remarkable increase in traded goods from distant lands. Arabic coins, Byzantine silks, and Frank weapons have all been found in areas under his influence. His approach to leadership inspired generations of Norse rulers who came after him. They saw in Bjorn's example that a true leader needed to be more than just a warrior. They needed to be a diplomat, an administrator, and a visionary. Even today, historians study his methods of governance as an early example of state-building in medieval Scandinavia. Perhaps the most enduring part of Bjorn's legacy is how he transformed the very notion of Viking leadership. He showed that true power wasn't just about how many battles you won or how much gold you could seize. It was about building something lasting, something that would endure long after the battles were over. In many ways, Bjorn Ironside wasn't just a Viking king. He was one of the first medieval Scandinavian rulers to truly understand the art of statecraft. Now, here's something truly puzzling. Despite all his remarkable achievements, Bjorn Ironside isn't nearly as well known as other Viking figures, including his own father, Ragnar Lothbrok. But why would such an extraordinary leader fade into the shadows of history? Well, the answer is both fascinating and somewhat tragic. You see, Viking culture was primarily based on oral tradition. Their stories, their achievements, their entire history was passed down through generations by skilled storytellers called skalds. These skalds would gather in great halls, reciting tales of brave warriors and incredible conquests. Bjorn's stories were among them, but here's the catch. These tales weren't written down until centuries after his death, mainly in the 12th and 13th centuries. Think about playing a game of telephone, but stretched across hundreds of years. While the core of the stories remained intact, details could be lost, changed, or mixed with other legends. Some of Bjorn's greatest achievements might have been attributed to others, or perhaps even forgotten entirely. But there's another, more deliberate reason for this historical oversight. During the medieval period, most historical records were kept by Christian monks and scholars, particularly those of the Catholic Church. And let me tell you, they had their own perspective on the Vikings. To them, these Norse warriors weren't just foreign invaders. They were pagan raiders who attacked monasteries and churches. Here's what's particularly interesting. While these Christian chroniclers couldn't ignore the Vikings completely, they often chose to portray them in the most unflattering light possible. They were depicted as savage barbarians, bloodthirsty heathens who only knew violence and destruction. The sophisticated political and trading systems that leaders like Bjorn established, barely mentioned. Their diplomatic achievements and cultural contributions, largely ignored. Think about it. When monks were writing about the Vikings who had raided their monasteries and burned their books, do you think they were eager to record stories about the wisdom and statesmanship of Viking leaders? This bias in historical records has had a lasting impact on how we remember the Viking Age. And here's another fascinating detail. Many of the records that might have told us more about Bjorn were lost during the numerous conflicts and fires that plagued medieval Europe. The great library of the monastery of Lindisfarne, for instance, which might have contained valuable information about Viking activities, was destroyed during Viking raids in the 8th century after Christ. The result of all this, a historical figure who should be remembered as one of the most significant leaders of his time, has been overshadowed by other Vikings whose stories better survived the passage of time. It's only in recent decades, as historians have begun to piece together evidence from various sources, archaeological findings, scattered historical records, and Norse sagas, that we're starting to understand the true scope of Bjorn Ironside's influence and achievements. So next time someone tells you they've never heard of Bjorn Ironside, you can tell them why, and help keep the memory of this remarkable leader alive. Today, while Bjorn Ironside might have faded from historical memory for centuries, he's making quite a comeback in modern popular culture. And let me tell you, it's fascinating to see how this legendary Viking leader is being rediscovered by new generations. The hit TV series Vikings has played a huge role in bringing Bjorn Ironside back into the spotlight. In the show, we see him portrayed as this powerful, complex character who evolves from a young warrior eager to prove himself into a legendary king. But here's something interesting. While the show takes some creative liberties with historical facts, it actually captures something very true about Bjorn's character, his ability to be both a fierce warrior and a thoughtful leader. You know what's really captivating about modern portrayals of Bjorn? They're helping us understand the human side of this historical figure. In Vikings, we see him struggling with the weight of his father's legacy, dealing with complex political relationships, and facing difficult decisions as a leader. These are the kinds of personal struggles that historical records rarely capture, but they help us connect with these historical figures on a more personal level. Speaking of modern interpretations, Bjorn's story has also inspired numerous books, graphic novels, and even video games. Each of these adaptations adds its own flavor to his legend. For instance, some video games focus on his tactical brilliance, while novels often explore his relationship with his famous father, Ragnar Lothbrok, and his brother, Ivar the Boneless. Here's something particularly fascinating. These modern retellings of Bjorn's story often incorporate elements from both historical records and Norse sagas, creating a rich tapestry that brings the Viking Age to life. While historians might raise an eyebrow at some of the dramatic embellishments, these popular adaptations serve an important purpose. They keep the memory of this remarkable leader alive and make history accessible to people who might otherwise never have heard of Bjorn Ironside. But let me share something really interesting with you. These modern adaptations have actually sparked a renewed interest in Viking history among scholars. As more people become fascinated with characters like Bjorn through popular media, there's been increased funding and support for historical research into the Viking Age. So while shows like Vikings might take some creative liberties, they're indirectly contributing to our understanding of actual Viking history. The impact of these popular portrayals goes beyond entertainment. They've helped reshape public perception of the Vikings, showing them as more than just raiders and warriors. Through characters like Bjorn, we see the complexity of Viking society, their political systems, their family dynamics, their cultural values, and their remarkable achievements as explorers and traders. In a way, Bjorn Ironside has achieved a kind of immortality that even he couldn't have imagined. His story continues to captivate audiences more than 1,000 years after his death, inspiring new generations to learn about this fascinating period of history. While the Bjorn we see on screen might not be exactly the same as the historical figure who conquered parts of France and ruled in Sweden, these modern interpretations help ensure that his legacy lives on, reminding us of a time when legendary warriors could become great kings. And as we reach the end of our journey through the remarkable life of Bjorn Ironside, let's take a moment to reflect on what made him truly extraordinary. You see, in an age when most saw only the path of the sword, Bjorn saw something more. He wasn't just another Viking warrior seeking glory in battle. He was a visionary who understood that true greatness comes from building, not just conquering. Think about this. In a world torn by violence and chaos, where survival often meant being the strongest or the most brutal, Bjorn chose a different path. Yes, he was a fearsome warrior, but his real strength lay in his ability to see beyond the immediate spoils of war. He understood that lasting power comes from building alliances, establishing trade networks, and creating systems of governance that could stand the test of time. His story teaches us something profound about leadership. In many ways, Bjorn was ahead of his time, showing that even in the midst of the Viking age, wisdom and strategy could triumph over brute force. He proved that a true leader needs not just courage in battle, but the vision to build something lasting. Now, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think made Bjorn stand out among the great Viking kings? Was it his military prowess, his diplomatic skills, or perhaps his ability to see beyond the traditional Viking way of life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on this fascinating historical figure. And if you've enjoyed diving into this incredible story with me, why not join us for more amazing tales from medieval history? Hit that like button, share this video with your friends who love history as much as we do, and don't forget to subscribe to the Medieval Archives. Trust me, we have so many more fascinating stories to share with you. Click that notification bell too. You won't want to miss our upcoming episodes where we'll explore more incredible figures from the medieval world. From legendary warriors to brilliant strategists, from epic battles to remarkable achievements, we're bringing history to life, one story at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life of one of history's most remarkable leaders. Until our next historical adventure, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the amazing stories that shaped our world. See you in our next video.